I never imagined my life would unravel the way it did. One moment I was a husband, a father, a son. The next, I was a criminal in the eyes of the law, stripped of my family and my freedom. It started with the divorce. Laura and I had been drifting apart for months, arguing over small things that slowly became massive cracks in our marriage. When we finally separated, I thought it would be messy but manageable. I was wrong. She accused me of being violent, a lie that shattered everything. She convinced her sister to back her story, and together they walked into court with tears and rehearsed fear. I sat there in disbelief as the judge granted her a restraining order and full custody of our kids. No investigation, no second chances, just a signature and my life was changed forever. That alone nearly broke me. But then came the real knockout punch. A few weeks later, my mother was diagnosed with terminal cancer. The doctors told us she had about 3 months left. My mom was my rock, the one person who had always believed in me no matter what. Her final wish was simple. She wanted to see her grandkids one last time. So I did something I knew I shouldn't. I reached out to Laura. I promised her I wouldn't even enter the room. I just wanted the kids to visit their dying grandmother. Begged. Pleaded. I tried to appeal to her humanity. She laughed. Then she told me she wouldn't let the kids visit, and that she wouldn't even bring them to the funeral when my mother passed. I felt like the floor had collapsed beneath me. But it didn't stop there. She went straight to the police. A few days later, I was arrested for violating the restraining order. The judge said he understood why I did it, but the law was the law. I was sentenced to 4 months in jail. My mother died while I was behind bars. No goodbye. No final hug. No last words. I remember sitting on the cold metal bunk, staring at the wall, feeling something inside me snap. The grief didn't just hurt. It hollowed me out. All I could think about was Laura. Not sadness. Not regret. Just rage. When I got out, I wasn't the same person. I had nowhere to go. No job. No money. Criminal record. Most of my family had already written me off. They didn't even call when my mother passed. I was completely alone. I found a run-down apartment on the edge of town. Cracked ceilings, leaking pipes, barely working heat. But it was cheap and that was all I could afford. The first night, I slept on the floor and stared at the ceiling, asking myself how my life had fallen this far. The next morning I went job hunting. Door after door slammed in my face. As soon as employers saw the gap in my work history, or worse my record, the conversations ended. Eventually a desperate convenience store hired me. Minimum wage. Long hours. No dignity. But it was something. Days blurred into nights. Drunks. Junkies. Stolen beer. Broken bathrooms. And every moment I stood behind that counter, I thought about Laura, living her life, unbothered, while I scraped together enough to survive. Every dollar went toward rent and food. Nothing else. No comfort. No escape. Just resentment. But resentment turned into something else. Plan. I knew I couldn't go near her. Not with the restraining order. But I didn't need to. I could ruin her life from a distance. And I was just getting started. Little did Laura know my first move would cost her everything, and she'd never see it coming. Once I stabilized financially, barely, I started gathering information. Quietly. Carefully. The first thing I wanted to know was where Laura worked. It took a bit of digging, but eventually I found out she managed a small boutique downtown. Cozy little place. Warm lighting. Friendly staff. The kind of job that looks perfect on social media. Perfect targets always look that way. I bought a cheap, half-broken laptop from a pawn shop and took it home. That night, I sat on my mattress, the laptop balanced on my knees, and began building identities. Fake profiles. Not just one, dozens. Each one had to feel real. Backstory. Personality. Pattern. I created names, birthdays, hobbies, even fake photos scraped from forgotten corners of the internet. One profile was a middle-aged woman who loved floral dresses and spoiled her golden retriever. She'd be the kind of customer who valued politeness and personal service. Another was a young, tech-savvy guy who posted online reviews whenever something annoyed him, Impulsive, loud, and impossible to ignore. Then there was an older man, grumpy, blunt, an army veteran, whose complaints carried weight simply because of who he was. These people didn't exist, but online they were as real as anyone else. Once the profiles were ready, I started writing. The first review was mild, just a comment about poor service. Nothing extreme, just enough to plant doubt. Then the next review escalated. And the next. And the next. I described Laura snapping at customers, rolling her eyes, whispering insults, making people feel unwelcome. Every sentence was fueled by the memory of my mother dying alone in a hospital bed while Laura laughed at my pain. Each review felt like reclaiming something that had been taken from me. I didn't stop. Every day new profiles, new reviews, new complaints. Over time the boutique's rating dropped, then dropped again. Customers stopped coming. The owner started noticing. Eventually, she launched an internal investigation. Laura denied everything. Course she did. But the damage was done. No business owner risks losing customers over one employee, especially when the complaints pile up daily. One afternoon, I asked a friend to walk into the boutique and casually ask for Laura. She wasn't there. I later learned she'd been fired. When I heard the news, I didn't feel relief. I felt power. A dark, twisted sense of justice. She took my mother's final wish away. So I took her job. But that was only the beginning. Next, I turned my attention to something even bigger, something far more personal. Our house. The house we bought together. The house where our kids had taken their first steps. The house she kept when she took everything else from me. The thought of her losing it filled me with cold satisfaction. I searched public records late into the night. Property tax filings. OA records. City code databases. Then I found it. Laura was behind on her property taxes. Not by much, but enough. I sent an anonymous tip to the city, posing as a concerned neighbor. I claimed the house might be abandoned or poorly maintained. That alone triggered an inspection. Sure enough, the inspectors found several code violations. Nothing major, but enough to flag the property. Then I made another move. I reached out to an old high school friend, someone who now worked in code enforcement. We hadn't spoken in years, but I played the nostalgia card, reminded him of old times, and slipped him a bribe to fast-track the process. Within weeks, Laura received a notice. Eviction proceedings, unpaid taxes, code violations, CHOA issues. She had a short window to vacate. I imagined her standing in that house, reading the notice, realizing she had nowhere to go. No job, no home, no backup. Everything was falling exactly how I wanted. But I wasn't finished. With Laura jobless and homeless, I was finally in position to take what she loved most, our children. With Laura's life unraveling, I saw my opportunity, but I had to move carefully. One wrong step and my parole officer would have thrown me right back into jail. I couldn't contact Laura directly. The restraining order was still active. Any mistake could cost me everything. So I used a middleman, my sister. She was the only family member who hadn't abandoned me. The only one who still answered my calls. When I told her what I wanted to do, she hesitated. She didn't want to get involved in something illegal or cruel. I told her I wasn't doing this for revenge. I told her I was doing it for the kids. And technically, that wasn't a lie. With her help, I filed for custody. I hired the best lawyer I could afford, one known for flipping bad situations into winning cases. He knew exactly how to shape the narrative. In court, we didn't talk about revenge. We talked about stability. We presented Laura as unfit, jobless, homeless, unable to provide a consistent environment for the kids. We presented me as reformed, a man who made mistakes, paid the price, and rebuilt his life. A father with a stable job, a home, and a desire to be present. When the court date arrived, the tension was unbearable. Laura sat across the room from me, looking exhausted, worn down, desperate. She told the judge everything. How she lost her job, how she was evicted, how I was trying to ruin her life. She begged him to believe her. but facts mattered more than feelings. I had a job. I had housing. She had nothing. The judge didn't care about accusations or emotional stories. He cared about what was best for the kids. And in his eyes, that was me. He granted me full custody. Laura nearly collapsed in the courtroom. I felt something inside me, a twisted sense of victory, mixed with a hollow emptiness I hadn't expected. I thought winning would fill the void. Didn't. The kids moved in with me a week later. And that's when reality hit. Emily and Jacob were distant, quiet, guarded. They didn't trust me. They missed their mother. They asked about her constantly. Every night, I lay awake in my apartment, listening to the silence, realizing that revenge hadn't brought peace. It had brought responsibility. I tried to connect with them, took them to the park, helped with homework, cooked dinners. But no matter what I did, they looked at me like a stranger. One night, Emily asked me something that cut deeper than anything Laura had ever done. "Why did you take us away from Mom?" I didn't have an answer. That's when I realized something painful. I had become the very thing I hated. I had used power to punish. I had weaponized the system just like Laura did to me. And my kids were the collateral damage. I couldn't live with that. So I made a decision. I asked my sister to reach out to Laura and tell her my proposal. The kids could visit her on weekends. I didn't want to speak to her. I didn't want to see her. But my kids deserved a mother, and she loved them even if she hurt me. At first, Laura didn't believe it. She thought it was another trick. But eventually she agreed. We met once, briefly, when I dropped the kids off. No arguing. No shouting. Just a quiet exchange and a few forced words. We weren't friends. We never would be. But we became something else. Parents. And slowly, things began to change. But just when I thought the worst was over, I realized the hardest part wasn't revenge. It was living with the consequences of it. The first few weeks after granting Laura visitation were uncomfortable. For all of us. The kids were confused. One week they were living with me. The next they were back with her, in whatever temporary housing she could manage. Their lives felt unstable, and I saw it in their behavior. Mood swings, withdrawn silence, sudden outbursts. And the worst part, I was the reason. Every time they came back from their mother's place, they seemed torn, emotionally split between two worlds neither of us had handled well. I started asking myself a question I had avoided since the beginning. Had I actually won? Yes, I had custody. Yes, I had taken everything Laura once took from me. But at what cost? My kids didn't feel safe. They didn't feel settled. They didn't feel whole. And that haunted me more than any jail cell ever could. I started therapy, something I never thought I'd do. At first, I went because my lawyer suggested it would look good in court. But eventually I kept going because I needed it. I talked about my mother, about prison, about the anger, about Laura, and about the emptiness that revenge left behind. My therapist told me something that hit harder than any insult. You didn't heal, you redirected your pain. She was right. I hadn't processed my grief. I hadn't mourned my mother. I hadn't forgiven myself or anyone else. I had simply aimed my pain at someone else and called it justice. That realization hurt, but it also freed me. For the first time since everything fell apart, I considered a different path. Not reconciliation. Not forgiveness. Peace. I began setting boundaries, real ones, not legal ones. I told my lawyer I wanted to shift from full custody to a shared arrangement. He warned me. He said it could weaken my position. He said Laura might take advantage. But I didn't care. This wasn't about power anymore. This was about my kids. We filed for a modification, supervised transitions, consistent schedules, and a shared parenting plan. Laura was shocked. She didn't trust my motives. And honestly, I didn't blame her. But when the judge approved the new arrangement, something changed. Not in her. Me. The kids started smiling again. They stopped asking when they'd see their mom, because they knew they would. They stopped walking on eggshells, because their lives no longer felt like a battlefield. And slowly, they started trusting me. Emily began telling me about school again. Jacob asked me to help him with science projects. They laughed more. They slept better. And for the first time our apartment felt like a home, not a hiding place. I didn't forget what Laura did. I didn't excuse it. But I stopped letting it control me. We kept communication strictly about the kids. No personal conversations. No emotional baggage. Just schedules, school events, and medical updates. It wasn't friendship. It was maturity. One afternoon, while dropping the kids off, Laura looked at me and said something I never expected. "I never thought you'd do this." Neither did I. That moment didn't erase the past, but it closed a chapter. I still carried guilt. I still carried regret. But I also carried something new. Accountability. I started volunteering at a community center, not because the court required it, but because I needed to give something back. I mentored kids who came from broken homes, kids who were angry, kids who felt abandoned. I saw myself in them. And I wanted to show them that pain doesn't have to become poison. But just when I thought I was finally healing, something unexpected happened. One letter in the mail would reopen everything I thought I had buried, and force me to confront the one thing I wasn't ready for. Forgiveness. The envelope was plain. No return address. No warning. Just my name written in careful handwriting. I almost threw it away. But something told me not to. Inside was a single sheet of paper, and a message I never expected. It was from Laura. Not a threat. Not a demand. Not an accusation. An apology. She wrote about the divorce. About the restraining order. About the custody battle. About my mother. She admitted she had acted out of fear. Fear of losing the kids, fear of being alone, fear of losing control. She admitted she exaggerated, manipulated, and made choices that destroyed more than just my life. She said she didn't expect forgiveness. She said she didn't deserve it. She just needed to say it. I stared at the letter for a long time. My hands were shaking. My chest felt tight. Anger rose, then sadness, then something else entirely. Relief. Not because she apologized, but because someone finally acknowledged the pain I carried. For years I had felt invisible, silenced, erased. That letter changed that. But it also left me with a question I wasn't prepared for. What do I do now? I didn't reply right away. I needed time. I talked to my therapist, my sister, even my lawyer. They all told me the same thing. Forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting. Doesn't mean trusting again. It means choosing not to carry the weight anymore. I thought about my mother. I thought about my kids. I thought about the man I had become, and the man I wanted to be. Then I wrote back. I didn't say everything was okay. I didn't say I forgave her. But I acknowledged her apology. And I thanked her for taking responsibility. That was enough. From that moment on, our co-parenting relationship improved. Communication became easier. Tension decreased. The kids noticed and they thrived. Emily started excelling in school. Jacob stopped waking up with nightmares. Our family wasn't whole, but it was functional. And that was something. But deep down I knew something else. My story wasn't over. I had spent so long reacting, to pain, to injustice, to betrayal, that I had never truly chosen my future. I had survived. But I hadn't lived. I started asking myself, what kind of father do I want to be? What kind of man do I want to become? What legacy do I want to leave behind? I didn't want my kids to remember me as the angry man who took their mother away. I wanted them to remember me as the man who fought for them, and then learned when to stop fighting. So I made another decision. One that surprised everyone, including myself. My next move wouldn't be about revenge, custody, or justice. It would be about rebuilding something I never thought I'd have again. I sold my apartment. Not because I had to, but because I wanted a fresh start. I found a modest house in a quiet neighborhood near the kids' school. Nothing fancy, but safe, clean, and full of sunlight. The kind of place where memories could grow instead of trauma. The kids helped pick the paint colors. Emily chose blue for her room. Jacob picked green. And for the first time since everything fell apart, we stood together. Not as survivors, not as victims, but as a family trying again. I also changed careers. I left the convenience store and started training in counseling, working toward becoming a peer support specialist for people transitioning out of incarceration. People like me. Men who had lost everything. Men who felt broken. Men who believed the world had no place for them anymore. I wanted to be proof that it wasn't over, even when it felt like it was. Laura and I continued co-parenting, respectfully, consistently, and without drama. We attended school events together, sat in the same room, applauded the same achievements. We didn't talk about the past. We focused on the future. And slowly, something unexpected happened. Trust. Not romantic trust. Not emotional closeness. But mutual respect. We trusted each other to show up for the kids. We trusted each other to put them first. And that was more than I ever thought possible. One afternoon after school play, Laura turned to me and said something that changed how I saw everything. I think we both became people we didn't recognize. But I'm glad we didn't stay that way. She was right. Pain had shaped us, but it didn't have to define us. I still carry scars. I still remember prison. I still miss my mother every day. But I no longer let those memories control me. Instead, I let them guide me. Guide me to patience. Guide me to accountability. Guide me to compassion. Not just for others but for myself. I used to believe revenge was justice. Now I understand something far more powerful. Healing is justice. Growth is justice. Breaking cycles is justice. And giving your children peace. That's the greatest justice of all. Today, when I tuck Emily and Jacob into bed, I don't feel anger. Feel gratitude. For the second chance I never thought I'd get. For the family I almost destroyed and then rebuilt. For the man I used to be, because he led me to the man I am now. And if there's one thing I've learned, it's this. Sometimes the greatest victory isn't winning. It's choosing not to destroy what you're still capable of building. If you've ever felt broken, betrayed, or consumed by anger, remember this. Your story doesn't end where your pain begins.